Mel Gibson's journey, from boy with a dream to a movie icon. Get ready to learn the story of a boy who went from obscurity to a movie legend. Mel Gibson's life is full of challenges, twists and turns, and moments of pure emotion. So grab your popcorn and come with me on this incredible journey. Childhood and moving to Australia. On January 3, 1956, in the city of Peekskill, New York, a boy was born who would one day become one of the greatest names in cinema. Mel Gerard Gibson. Raised in a large family, he was the sixth of 11 siblings. His childhood was marked by a house that was always full of voices, laughter, and the typical chaos of growing up surrounded by many siblings. From an early age, Mel learned to stand out from the crowd, but no one could have imagined how far he would go. But his life was about to change forever. Mel's father, Hutton Gibson, was a very intelligent man with strong ideas. He always said he wanted to give his children the best possible future. And that's why, when Mel was just 12 years old, the family packed their bags and left for a completely new place, Australia. Now just imagine you're just a boy used to your home, your friends, and your routine. Suddenly, you're on the other side of the world in a completely different country. That's exactly what happened to Mel. He and his brothers traded the icy landscapes of New York for the warmth of Australia, with its beautiful beaches, bouncing kangaroos, and a completely different way of life. But why such a radical change? Hutton Gibson, Mel's father, didn't want his sons to be drafted into the Vietnam War. At the time, the United States was in the middle of a conflict and young men were being sent to fight. Hutton believed that Australia would be a safer place full of opportunities for his family. And so Mel started a new life in Sydney, Australia. At first it wasn't easy. He had a different accent, didn't know anyone, and missed home. But like any good protagonist in a great story, Mel learned to adapt. He made new friends, explored this new world, and, without knowing it, was just a few steps away from discovering the great talent that would change his life forever. If you liked this beginning, I can continue with the story, taking you through each stage of Mel Gibson's life with the same engaging energy. The first steps in acting. Imagine a young man who had no idea that he was about to become one of the biggest stars in the world. That's right. Mel Gibson didn't grow up dreaming of being an actor. In fact, he wanted to have an ordinary life, maybe even pursue a career as a journalist. But fate had other plans for him. After settling in Australia, Mel finished high school and started thinking about what he wanted to do with his life. He wasn't sure which path to take, but his sister, who believed in his natural talent, saw something special. She was the one who signed him up to audition at the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, NIDA, in Sydney. Now think about it. You're living your life normally with no aspirations of becoming an actor, and suddenly, boom, your sister decides for you and puts you in an audition for one of the most respected drama schools in the country. Mel, who had no experience whatsoever, went into the audition without much expectation. He didn't know he was about to enter a completely new world. But as soon as he started acting, something incredible happened. The teachers noticed immediately. This young man had a rare talent. Mel was accepted into the school and began studying drama. At first he thought it was all very strange. After all, acting required him to express himself in ways he had never done before. But over time he got the hang of it. And it wasn't long before he stood out among the students. There, at NIDA, he met other talented young people who also dreamed of becoming actors. One of them was Geoffrey Rush, who would later become a famous actor and Oscar winner. But Mel's life wasn't all glamour. He had to work to support himself while he studied. To earn money, he did a bit of everything. Washing dishes, working in factories, and even acting in small plays. It was during this time that he began to develop the discipline and passion that would lead him to stardom. Then his big moment arrived. While studying at NIDA, Mel was cast to act in a play called Romeo and Juliet. It was there, on stage, in front of a packed audience, that he felt something different. It was as if he had found his life's purpose. He knew he was on the right path. The shy kid from New York who had moved to Australia without knowing what to do with his life was now becoming a real actor. But he still had no idea that, in just a few years, he would be starring in one of the most iconic films of all time. Want to know how Mel Gibson went from theater to movie star? Then get ready for the next chapter of this epic story. The success of Mad Max, 1979. The birth of a legend. Now imagine this. You are a young actor fresh out of drama school without much experience in film. And out of nowhere, you get the chance to star in a film that will change your life forever. That's exactly what happened to Mel Gibson. After graduating from the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, NIDA, Mel began acting in small productions for television and theater. He had talent, charisma, and stage presence, but he wasn't yet a household name. That changed when an Australian director named George Miller was looking for an actor for a film he was producing, Mad Max. But here's a curious detail. Mel Gibson almost didn't get the lead role. The story goes like this. The day before he was supposed to audition for the film, Mel got into a bar fight and got beaten up. He showed up to the audition with his face covered in bruises and swelling. George Miller took one look at him and said, "This guy is perfect for my movie." The director thought Mel had the perfect look for the chaotic and violent world of Mad Max, but he asked Mel to come back a few weeks later, once his injuries had healed, for a real audition. And when he did, he blew everyone away. At just 23 years old, Mel was cast as Max Rokitansky, a tough cop in a post-apocalyptic future where the roads were dominated by violent gangs. The film was gritty, action-packed, and totally innovative for its time. And even with a shoestring budget, Mad Max became a worldwide phenomenon. The box office was a hit. The film grossed over $100 million worldwide, becoming one of the highest-grossing independent films in history. Overnight, Mel Gibson went from being an unknown to an action star. Now Hollywood was watching him. Audiences wanted more. Magazines wanted interviews. The world wanted to know, who was this young Australian actor with an intense gaze and an unforgettable screen presence? And the answer was not long in coming. With the success of Mad Max, Mel Gibson was ready for something even bigger. Little did he know, but his journey was just beginning. What now? How would a young Australian actor, newly famous, deal with the pressure of Hollywood? What would come next? Get ready, because this story only gets more intense. The charm and talent in The Year of Living Dangerously, 1982, showing he was more than just an action star. After the resounding success of Mad Max, Mel Gibson became the new face of action cinema. Everyone wanted to see him running at high speeds, facing villains and saving the day. But Mel wanted more. He didn't want to be just a hero in chase movies. He wanted to be recognized as a great actor. That's when the perfect opportunity came to show his dramatic side. The film The Year of Living Dangerously, 1982. Unlike Mad Max, this was not an action film. It was an intense political drama, directed by award-winning Peter Weir, the same director of great films such as Dead Poets Society and The Truman Show. This was a serious, sophisticated, emotional project. And for Mel Gibson, it was the chance to prove that he had real talent. In the film, he plays Guy Hamilton, an ambitious young journalist who is sent to cover events in Indonesia during a period of great political instability in the 1960s. Mel Gibson's character finds himself in the middle of a country on the brink of chaos, trying to understand everything that is happening around him, while getting involved in a romance with Sigourney Weaver's character, the iconic actress from Alien. But there was another important detail. In the film, Mel acts opposite actress Linda Hunt, who plays a challenging role and ends up stealing the show, so much so that she won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, being the first woman to win playing a male character. It was a new and intense experience for Mel. He had to immerse himself in the role, study geopolitics, and learn how to convey more subtle and profound emotions on screen. If before he was just the tough guy from Mad Max, now he was showing that he could be romantic, intelligent, and complex. The result? The audience loved it. Critics who previously saw Mel Gibson as just a pretty face in action movies began to take him seriously as a real actor. He showed that he could hold his own in a more sophisticated film, with fewer explosions and more emotion. And that opened the doors to the future. With this performance, Mel proved that he could navigate different genres and that he was ready for the next big step: Hollywood. He left the post-apocalyptic streets and entered the world of political dramas. But what now? How would a young Australian actor conquer Hollywood? What would come next? Don't look back, because this story is only heating up. Hollywood and Lethal Weapon, 1987. The birth of an action movie icon. Mel Gibson had already made a name for himself in Australia, but he knew that if he wanted to become a movie legend, he needed to conquer Hollywood. So, in the mid-1980s, he started accepting roles in the United States. At first, he made a few films that went unnoticed, But everything changed when he received the biggest offer of his career, the role of Martin Riggs in Lethal Weapon, 1987. Now imagine this: a cop with a dark past who has nothing to lose, but at the same time is extremely charismatic, funny, and unpredictable. That was Martin Riggs. He was crazy, dangerous, and completely unpredictable. Exactly the kind of character that Mel Gibson knew how to play perfectly. But what made the film an instant classic was the chemistry between Mel Gibson and Danny Glover, who played his partner Roger Murtaugh. Murtaugh was the experienced, serious, and tired cop. Riggs was the crazy young man, fearless of nothing. The combination of the two created one of the best action movie duos of all time. The story of Lethal Weapon mixed intense action, sharp humor, and a touch of drama, which set it apart from other films of the genre. Mel Gibson was not only a guy who knew how to fight, he also delivered an emotionally charged performance, making Riggs a real, human, and even vulnerable character. And it didn't take long for the audience to fall in love. The film was an absolute success at the box office, grossing millions of dollars and transforming Mel Gibson into one of the biggest action movie stars of the 80s. But the best was yet to come. The success of Lethal Weapon spawned several sequels, each one bringing even more action, more jokes, and more iconic moments between Riggs and Murtaugh. The franchise became one of the most popular in the history of cinema, once and for all consolidating Mel Gibson as a definitive Hollywood star. Now he was no longer just the guy from Mad Max. He was one of the biggest actors on the planet, and the doors of Hollywood were wide open for him. But what now? What comes after becoming one of the most recognizable faces in action cinema? Would Mel Gibson continue as an actor, or did he have even bigger plans? Hold on tight, because the next chapter of this story will surprise you. Charisma and versatility in film, showing he could do it all. After the overwhelming success of Lethal Weapon, Mel Gibson could have been comfortable playing the role of an action star. But he wanted more. He wanted to prove that he wasn't just a pretty face shooting bullets and jumping out of explosions. He wanted to show that he was a real actor. And that's exactly what he did. In the years that followed, Mel began to explore different genres. He didn't want to be pigeonholed as just an action hero, so he began choosing roles that required more emotional depth and dramatic talent. From action to drama and romance. The journey of a complete actor. Hamlet, 1990. A surprise in Shakespeare's tragedy. Yes, Mel Gibson played Hamlet, one of the most difficult and respected roles in the history of theater. Many doubted that he would be able to do it. After all, he came from action films. But when the film was released, critics were shocked. He showed impressive dramatic intensity and proved that he could shine in classic drama. Forever Young, 1992. Showing the sensitive side. In this film, Mel played a World War II pilot who wakes up 50 years later and discovers that the world has completely changed. It was a film full of emotion and romance, where he showed that he could also be a romantic heartthrob. The Man Without a Face, 1993. His first director. This film was a milestone in Mel's career, because it was the first time he directed a feature film. He also starred in the film, playing a teacher with a disfigured face who helps a young boy overcome his fears. The film was a hit and proved that Mel was not only an incredible actor, but also a talented director. Maverick, 1994. Comedy and Western in the Mel Gibson style. He also showed his funny side in Maverick, an action-packed Western film with comedy. Here he played a cheating but charismatic card player who was always getting into trouble. Each of these films showed a different side of Mel Gibson. He could be intense, romantic, dramatic, and funny, all at the same time. But the best was yet to come. After conquering the world as an actor and making his debut as a director, he was about to take the biggest leap of his career. An epic film that would make him a movie legend. He was already a star. He had already proven himself to be a great actor. But now Mel Gibson was about to direct one of the greatest films of all time. Want to know which one? Then stick around, because the next chapter of this story is pure emotion. Braveheart, 1995. The film that turned Mel Gibson into a cinema legend. Now imagine this. You're already one of the most famous actors in the world, you've starred in big hits and even directed a film. But you still feel like something is missing. That epic grand film that will go down in cinema history. For Mel Gibson, that film was Braveheart, 1995. But what makes this film so special? Well, hold on tight, because this part of the story is simply incredible. the story behind the film that defined a generation. Mel Gibson didn't just act in Braveheart. He directed the film. That's right. And directing a medieval epic is no easy feat. The film tells the story of William Wallace, a Scottish warrior who leads a revolt against English rule in the 13th century. The story is full of epic battles, moving speeches, and intense drama. When Mel decided to make this film, many people were skeptical. An action star directing a historical epic? That was not going to work. Braveheart was an absolute phenomenon. From the very first scene, the audience was transported to medieval Scotland, feeling every sword strike, every tear, and every cry for freedom. The battle scenes were brutal and realistic, something that few productions could achieve at the time. The soundtrack was unforgettable, composed by James Horner, who also composed the soundtrack for Titanic. Mel Gibson's performance as William Wallace was one of the best of his career. And then came the acclaim. The film was nominated for 10 Oscars and won 5 statuettes, including Best Picture and Best Director for Mel Gibson. This was a huge achievement. He was no longer just a Hollywood star. He was now an award-winning and respected filmmaker. And of course, who doesn't remember the iconic scene where William Wallace, even when facing death, screams with all his might, "Freedom!" This scene became one of the most memorable in the history of cinema. But the success of Braveheart brought something more to Mel. He realized that his passion was not just acting, it was telling stories. Directing films was his true destiny. And this new passion would lead him to one of the most controversial and impactful films in the history of cinema. He won the Oscar, conquered Hollywood, and became a legend. But now Mel Gibson was about to direct a film that would change everything. Want to know what it is? Then get ready, because the next chapter of this journey will surprise you. Success as a director and producer, Mel Gibson reinvents himself in cinema. After winning the Oscar for Best Director for Braveheart, Mel Gibson realized that his true passion was telling stories, not just acting in them. The film's success catapulted him to a new level in Hollywood. He was now not just an action star, he was a visionary director, capable of creating epic and thrilling films. But what next? Now that Mel had proven that he could direct, he wanted to explore even deeper and more challenging stories. And that's when he began to focus on producing and directing his own films. From actor to great filmmaker, the next step in Mel Gibson's career. With the acclaim of Braveheart, Mel Gibson set up his own production company, Icon Productions. He wanted to have complete control over his films, from the script to the final edit. This meant that he no longer had to wait for Hollywood to approve his projects. He could make the films he wanted. But he didn't give up acting. In the years that followed, Mel continued to star in major hits, while working behind the scenes as a producer and director. Payback, 1999. Returning to the roots of action. A thriller full of twists and turns, where Mel plays a criminal betrayed by his own partners. It was a box office success and proved that he was still the king of action films. The Patriot, 2000. Another great epic story. After shining in Braveheart, Mel returned to the historical genre with The Patriot, where he played a farmer who becomes a hero in the American Revolutionary War. The film was a success and thrilled audiences with its spectacular battle scenes. Signs, 2002. Horror and science fiction. This time, Mel surprised everyone by starring in a science fiction thriller directed by M. Night Shyamalan. In the film, he plays a former pastor who faces an alien invasion while trying to protect his family. The film was a huge success, grossing over $400 million worldwide. But Mel still wasn't satisfied. He wanted to direct an even more ambitious film. Behind the scenes, he was working on a very personal project. A controversial, daring, and brutal film that no one in Hollywood wanted to finance. But Mel Gibson believed so much in this story that he decided to finance it all with his own money. This film would be called The Passion of the Christ, and it would change his career forever. He was already a renowned actor. He had already won an Oscar as a director. But now Mel Gibson was about to release the most controversial and impactful film of his career. What happened next? Find out in the next chapter of this incredible story. The Passion of the Christ, 2004. The film that changed everything. Now imagine this. You are one of the most famous actors and directors in Hollywood. You could choose any project, any commercial film that would guarantee millions at the box office. But instead, You decide to make an extremely controversial film, spoken in a dead language and so brutal that many studios are afraid to finance it. That's exactly what Mel Gibson did with The Passion of the Christ, 2004. The movie that nobody wanted to make, but that became a worldwide phenomenon. The Passion of the Christ was no ordinary movie. It was a brutal and intense reconstruction of the last hours of Jesus Christ before his crucifixion. Mel Gibson wanted to tell this story in the most authentic and visceral way possible, without softening anything, without cutting anything to please Hollywood. But here's the most shocking detail. No major studio wanted to finance the project. The executives thought the film wouldn't be successful. After all, it was an entire film spoken in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew, without a single word of English. Furthermore, the torture and crucifixion scenes were so brutal that many people thought no one would be able to watch it all the way through. But Mel Gibson didn't give up. He believed so much in the project that he invested around $30 million of his own money to finance the film. That's right, he paid for it all by himself. The impact and controversy that shook the world. When the film was finally released in 2004, the world was shocked. The scenes were extremely realistic and difficult to watch, showing the suffering of Christ in a way that no other film had done before. Jim Caviezel's performance as Jesus was intense and moving, bringing an interpretation that deeply moved the audience. The film divided opinions. Some called it a masterpiece, others said it was controversial and even offensive. But the result? The film grossed over $600 million at the box office, becoming the most profitable religious film in history. And what's more, to this day, The Passion of the Christ is considered one of the most impactful films ever made about the Christian faith. However, the film's success brought something unexpected. Mel Gibson became the center of many discussions. Some people accused him of being radical, others applauded him for his courage. The film made him a respected filmmaker, but it also put him in the middle of great controversy. And it was at this moment that Mel's personal life began to fall apart. He had proven that he could make great films without needing Hollywood. But now Mel Gibson was about to enter the most turbulent phase of his life. What happened? How did he fall into the abyss and then try to bounce back? Find out in the next chapter of this amazing story. Controversies and difficult times. The fall of an icon. Now imagine this. You are one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, an award-winning director and a filmmaker who made one of the most impactful films in history. But suddenly everything begins to fall apart. That's exactly what happened to Mel Gibson in the years following the success of The Passion of the Christ. After the film, Mel was at his peak. He could have done any project, directed any major production, but instead he entered a dark period in his life. The problem with alcohol and the beginning of the controversy. Since the 80s, Mel had already struggled with problems with alcohol. He even spoke about it publicly, saying that he had difficult moments, but that he tried to stay in control. But in 2006, everything came to light in the worst possible way. That year, Mel was stopped by a police officer in Malibu, California for driving drunk. And that's when everything fell apart. During the stop, he made comments that were considered offensive and prejudiced. The news exploded in the media. The tabloids talked about nothing else. The star of Braveheart, the director of The Passion of the Christ, was now at the center of one of the biggest controversies in Hollywood. And the consequences were severe. Hollywood began to distance itself from him. Many studios cut ties and his name began to be avoided in major productions. The media portrayed him as a villain, and even with apologies he could not recover his image. His career was in freefall. But the worst was yet to come. Divorce, more controversies and isolation. In 2009 he separated from his wife Robin Moore, with whom he had been married for more than 30 years. The divorce was one of the most expensive in Hollywood history, costing Mel more than $400 million. Shortly after, he was involved in another scandal, this time with his new girlfriend Oksana Grigorieva. Leaked audios showed heated arguments between the two, and Mel was accused of aggressive behavior. Now, it was not only Hollywood that was against him. The public also began to reject him. Mel Gibson went from being one of the most respected men in the industry to one of the most cancelled. He stopped acting, was removed from major productions, and for a while it seemed like his career was over. He tried to stay out of the spotlight, but no one knew if he would make it back. After all, few in Hollywood can survive scandals of this magnitude. And then when no one believed in him anymore, Mel Gibson started planning his comeback. He went from the top to the bottom. But could a star like Mel Gibson ever rise again? How did he manage to return to Hollywood after all that? The answer comes in the next chapter of this incredible story. Hacksaw Ridge, 2016. The Redemption of Mel Gibson. Now imagine this. You've been cancelled, banned from Hollywood, and blacklisted from the entertainment industry. Everyone said your career was over. But against all odds, you find a way to come back. That was Mel Gibson's path. And the big turning point came with a film that no one expected, Hacksaw Ridge, 2016. The film that brought Mel Gibson back into the game. After years away from the director's chair and with few appearances in the movies, Mel Gibson knew that if he wanted to come back, he needed to do something big. He couldn't just appear in any movie. He needed a project that would remind the world why he was one of the greatest directors in Hollywood. And that's when the perfect opportunity arose. To direct a war epic based on a true story. Hacksaw Ridge tells the story of Desmond Doss, an American soldier who refused to bear arms in World War II, but saved dozens of lives on the battlefield. The film had everything Mel liked to work on. An epic and exciting story. Strong and striking characters. Brutal and extremely realistic battles. An inspiring hero who was outside the traditional norm. The lead role went to Andrew Garfield, who delivered a spectacular performance as Desmond Doss. But what really caught everyone's attention was Mel Gibson's direction. He proved that he was still a master storyteller. The success and recognition that no one expected. When the film premiered, audiences and critics were left speechless. The war scenes were intense, shocking, and realistic. Some of the best ever committed to film. The human drama was gripping and moving, making people cry in theaters. Mel Gibson's direction was acclaimed as one of the best of his career. And the result? The film was nominated for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Mel Gibson. That's right. The man that Hollywood had cancelled was back at the biggest awards show in cinema. It was a moment of redemption. After years of being ostracized, Mel Gibson proved that he was still a brilliant filmmaker. He received a standing ovation, was praised by critics and filmmakers, and suddenly Hollywood was ready to accept him again. He was no longer just a man of controversy, he was once again a visionary director. And the big question now was, what would come next? He fell, got back up, and proved that he was still one of the greats of cinema. But would this comeback be definitive? What would Mel Gibson do next? Recent projects and career persistence. Mel Gibson continues in the industry. Now think about this. After being cancelled, banned from Hollywood, and discredited, you come back with an Oscar-nominated film. But what happened next? Did Hollywood really accept you back? Or were there still obstacles in the way? Mel Gibson knew that Hacksaw Ridge had been his great redemption, but he couldn't stop there. To prove that he was truly back, he needed to keep working, acting, directing, and producing. Mel Gibson as an actor, returning to the big screen. After years away from big films, Mel returned to acting with full force. He appeared in several productions in recent years, showing that he still had screen presence and charisma to spare. Daddy's Home 2, 2017. Back to comedy. Yes, Mel Gibson made a comedy. And not just any comedy, but one of the biggest box office hits of that year. In the film, he plays a grumpy and tough grandfather alongside Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg. It was a way to show that he also knew how to laugh at himself and win back the audience. Brute Force, Dragged Across Concrete, 2018. A return to police drama. In this intense and brutal thriller, Mel played a tough and controversial police officer alongside Vince Vaughn. The film was praised for its realism and violent style, reminiscent of the classic police films of the 70s. Boss Level, 2021. Action and science fiction. Here Mel Gibson showed that he could still be an imposing villain, playing a mysterious military man in a thrilling action film. And of course he was also working behind the scenes on new projects as a director. Mel Gibson as director. New challenges on the horizon. Mel Gibson has not given up on his career as a director. In fact, he has been preparing major projects for the coming years. The Resurrection of the Christ. The sequel to The Passion of the Christ. After the huge success of The Passion of the Christ, Mel has always said that he wanted to make a sequel, showing the events after the crucifixion of Jesus. The project is in development and promises to be as impactful as the first film. Lethal Weapon 5. the final chapter of the franchise. That's right. Mel Gibson has confirmed that he will direct and star in the final film of the Lethal Weapon saga. After the death of the original director of the franchise, Richard Donner, Mel took over the helm of the project, ensuring that this iconic film series has a worthy conclusion. Other projects in development. In addition, Mel is involved in several other productions including action and thriller films, proving that he still has a lot to offer to the cinema. Mel Gibson today, still a strong name in cinema. Despite all the controversies of the past, Mel Gibson remains one of the most respected names in cinema. His talent as an actor and director is undeniable, and he has shown that it is possible to rise again even after falling. He survived the cancellation. He was nominated for an Oscar again. He continues to work and produce films. His comeback was not easy, but he proved that he still has a place in the industry. And now the question everyone is asking, what will be Mel Gibson's next big project? He fell, got back up and keeps working. But does he still have another big hit ahead of him? Will we see another epic film from Mel Gibson? Keep following this incredible story. Hacksaw Ridge and Beyond. The legacy as a visionary director. Now imagine this. You have already proven that you can be one of the greatest actors in Hollywood, won awards as a director and made unforgettable films. But what really defines your legacy? For Mel Gibson, his legacy lies not only in the box office successes, but also in the impact his films had on the industry and audiences. And there is no way to talk about Mel Gibson's legacy without mentioning Hacksaw Ridge and his mark as a director. His acclaim as a director. After Braveheart and The Passion of the Christ, Hacksaw Ridge solidified Mel Gibson as one of the most talented directors of his generation. The film was praised for its brutal and realistic portrayal of war. Desmond Doss' inspiring narrative moved audiences, becoming one of the best war films of the last decade. Gibson was nominated for an Oscar again, proving that his talent as a director was unquestionable. This showed the world that he was not just an action star, he was a visionary filmmaker. A director who stands out in the industry. What sets Mel Gibson apart from other directors? Action and emotion in the right measure. His films have grand scenes but always with a strong emotional side. Authenticity and realism. He is not afraid to show the brutality of history, whether in a medieval battle, World War II, or the crucifixion of Christ. Inspiring stories. Even in the midst of violence, his films feature characters who defy adversity and become symbols of courage and faith. Mel Gibson doesn't just direct films. He creates unforgettable cinematic experiences. His influence as a filmmaker. Many directors today admit that they were inspired by Mel Gibson. He influenced cinema in many ways. Braveheart helped popularize historical epics in the 90s. The Passion of the Christ proved that independent films can be huge, even without the support of Hollywood studios. Hacksaw Ridge raised the standard for modern war films, influencing directors such as Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino. Even with all the controversy, Mel Gibson remains one of the most respected directors in the industry. Now the big question is, what's next? Does he have another epic film in store for us? He has directed some of the most impactful films in the history of cinema. But is the best of Mel Gibson yet to come? The cultural impact of Mel Gibson, a name etched in the history of cinema. Now imagine this. You not only make successful films, but you create stories that span generations, that move, inspire, and even generate debates around the world. This is the true impact of an artist. And in the case of Mel Gibson, his cultural impact is enormous. He was not just an action actor from the 80s, nor just a director of historic films. He redefined genres, influenced filmmakers, and left a profound mark on cinema and pop culture. Mel Gibson and action cinema, the pioneer of the modern cop. When we talk about action films, it is impossible not to remember the Lethal Weapon franchise. The chemistry between Riggs, Mel Gibson, and Murtaugh, Danny Glover, created one of the greatest duos in cinema. The buddy cop genre, which became a craze in the 80s and 90s, owes a great deal of credit to Lethal Weapon. Films like Bad Boys and Rush Hour followed this formula. The perfect mix of action, comedy, and drama made Riggs an iconic character. Today, when we watch films about funny cop duos, we can remember that Mel Gibson helped define this style. The impact of Braveheart, a historical classic. If Lethal Weapon marked action cinema, Braveheart revolutionized historical epic films. Before the film, the genre was on the decline. Hollywood thought that medieval battle films no longer had any space. But after the success of the film, other epics were produced, such as Gladiator, 2000, which followed a very similar style. To this day, the phrases and scenes from the film are remembered, especially William Wallace's cry "Freedom." Fun fact: even Game of Thrones and The Lord of the Rings used Braveheart as a reference for battle scenes. The impact of The Passion of the Christ, a film that divided the world. If there is one film that generated worldwide discussion, it was The Passion of the Christ. Before its release, no one imagined that a film spoken in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew could be a success. It showed that there is a large audience for religious films, inspiring productions such as Son of God and The Case for Christ. It sparked debates among theologians, religious people, and film critics, leading to the film being studied to this day. Mel Gibson didn't just make a film, he created a cultural phenomenon. Gibson's style of filmmaking: intense, realistic, and fearless. If there is one thing that Mel Gibson brought to cinema, it was a unique style of storytelling. His films are brutal and realistic, unafraid to show suffering and war as they really are. He values strong and emotional characters who fight against gigantic adversities. His stories are inspiring, always focused on courage, faith, and overcoming. Even with all the controversies, he changed cinema. And that is something no one can deny. Now, with everything he has done, the final question is, what will be his definitive legacy? Will Mel Gibson be remembered as a cinema genius, or will his controversies overshadow his achievements? He created iconic characters, directed epic films, and changed the way cinema tells stories. But how will the world remember Mel Gibson? Find out in the next and final chapter of this impressive journey. Wife and children, an intense family life. Robin Moore was his wife for over 30 years. They married in 1980 and had 7 children together. The marriage ended in 2009, in one of the most expensive divorces in Hollywood, costing Mel Gibson an estimated $400 million. After the divorce, Mel had a relationship with Oksana Grigorieva, with whom he had another child, but the relationship was marked by controversy and a turbulent separation. Later, he began a relationship with Rosalind Ross, a screenwriter 34 years younger than him. Together, they had their 9th child, completing a huge Gibson family. A large family, a life marked by intense relationships. Mel Gibson's personal life has always been full of ups and downs. He came from a large and traditional family, built his own large family, but also faced challenges in relationships. Despite the difficulties, one thing is certain. His family has always had a great impact on his life and his decisions. Whether in art, faith, or the way he sees the world, his roots have always been present. Now tell me, did you know that Mel Gibson had so many children? And what part of his story surprised you the most? Leave your comment. Mel Gibson's legacy, a name forever in the history of cinema. Now stop and think, what makes an artist forever remembered? Is it the awards? The films he made? Or the way he left a mark on people's lives? In Mel Gibson's case, the answer is clear. He is a cinema legend. How will the world remember Mel Gibson? As one of the most charismatic and talented actors of his generation, starring in hits such as Lethal Weapon and Mad Max. As a visionary director who delivered epics such as Braveheart, The Passion of the Christ, and Hacksaw Ridge. As a filmmaker who changed the way of telling stories, bringing realism, emotion, and intensity to each film. Despite all the controversies, Mel Gibson proved that talent and passion for cinema speak louder. He fell, got back up, and continues working, making it clear that his story is not over yet. The big question now is, what will Mel Gibson still have in store for us in the future? Will he direct another great epic? Will The Resurrection of the Christ be a new success? Or will Lethal Weapon 5 be his farewell to cinema? Well, only time will tell. But one thing is certain. Mel Gibson has already secured his place in cinema history forever. So, did you like this incredible story? Well, now you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more epic content like this. Leave a like to help this video reach more people. Comment below, what's your favorite Mel Gibson movie? We want to know what you think. And activate the bell so you don't miss any news from the world of cinema. Here you'll find the best stories about the biggest movie stars. Now tell me, What other celebrity do you want to see here? See you in the next video.